Okay, let's get a new block build. This is a grid I just took randomly from ASUS. So let's get for a new project that I'm going to call, I'm going to call this AIF, create project. And here is the work canvas. So first I'm going to check the width for this layout. I'm going to check how large the container is, and I am noticing this is approximately 1400 pixels. I'm going to use this measure exactly as it is in the design. First I'm going to create a section block, AIF number 1, for which I'm going to add a 8 pixels padding towards the center. Next I'm going to add a new div block that I'm going to name container number 2. And for this particular container, I am going to space centered horizontally so that the container is always at the center even when the screen is larger than it is now. I'm going to adjust the width to 100%, and for the max width I'm going to use 1420 pixels, just to follow what I'm having in my design. Next, I'm having 2 elements on this layout. So at the top I'm having this headline consisting of 3 elements, 3 text elements, right? And at the bottom I'm having this grid. So let's get started with the top elements. I'm going to create 2 divs inside my container, and on the top I'm going to use something like, I don't know, heading or top block number 1, and I'm going to call this bottom block number 1. So inside this I'm going to place 2 additional rows, one for those 2 items and one additional for this select styles and date item. So I'm having something like this. I'm going to call this heading top AF number 1. This is going to be my heading bottom. I'm sorry, heading number 1. Okay, and just in here I'm going to have 2 additional items. This one is a link, while this one is just a headline. So I'm going to be adding a headline like this one. A headline heading. a heading. Okay, and I'm going to be calling this heading AF number 1. I'm going to delete the margins for this heading. Those are margins that Webflow is providing this by default. And next I'm going to get this inline, display inline, right? And also I am going to copy the styles. I'm talking about a 22 pixels font size. So let's do this 22 pixels. I usually do 1.3 EM for the head of the lines. It's for text used as headlines. EM is a proportional measure to the size of the text line, which is in this case 22. So next I'm going to use a 24. I'm sorry, and I'm having also capitals here, and I'm having a little space in between the characters. So I'm going to do let me see, a capitalize all caps for this, and also I'm going to use say 2 pixels, which is kind of the equivalent to those 200 in here for the text that is inside. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste the text. Finally, I'm going to use a bool for this text. Unfortunately, this design is having this in Helvetica. I can't get Helvetica to Webflow as for now, but I believe that Arial will just do it. Or I'm going to use a kind of more standard font, perhaps. I'm going to use Open Sans just for the sake of getting this exercise done. Okay, so for the container of this text, I'm going to center to align to the center, right? And what I'm going to do next is to add a link element at the side of the headline, the heading link, which is going to become my shop all link. Okay, so I'm going to have something like link, heading link. Heading link top. F number 1. I'm going to paste and copy the text and give this text 20 pixels size, 1.3 em for the I'm saying the height of the line. And also, I'm going to use this very same black from the design over here. Okay, let's create this. Let's use that black in here as well. Next, I am going to give this let me see, this is a bold style. So I'm going to use bold style for this. And finally, I am just going to add a little space between those two elements. Okay, so I believe this will just do for now. Or perhaps I'm going to use EM. Yes, that's better. So the advantages of using EM for this kind of designs is that when working on mobile, EM will adjust as a proportion to the size of the text. So if I'm adjusting this to 18 pixels for example on mobile, EM will be a proportion of 18 pixels. If those measurements in here will be pixels, we'll have to adjust that on mobile as well. So it's kind of a way to cut time in here. This being said, let's go for this over here. Select the styles and a date, specific date. So I'm going to use this head and bottom div that I previously created for placing over here this text, and I'm going to call this tagline. Tagline top F number 1. I'm going to get this centered, and I'm going to provide this with these styles. These styles 14 for the size of the text. Hence, Webflow is not allowing me to change this if I write 14 over the default 14. So I just wrote any other random number here. Then I switched to 14 pixels. What else do I have here? This is regular. So I'm staying regular here. Normal. Okay. And next, I am going to set a black color for this particular line. Maybe a little space in here, although the design is showing only 2 pixels, but I think it will do about 3 or 4 pixels here. Okay, so it looks like we are almost done for this area. We'll continue with mobile a little later. Next, I'm going to set a little margin between this element, this text, and and the grid that is after it. So I'm going to use 20 pixels or 24 pixels if I'm not mistaken, 22. That's kind of almost the same. So notice that I'm having this margin over here, right, set to the element that is next to the to that element that is going to be separated from, instead of, for instance, having the 20 pixels margin to be set for this child element of the element that is going to be separate from this one. What I mean is, if I'm having two elements that are going to be separated, I'm setting up the margin to one of those elements. And also, I'm setting up that margin to the element that is at the top. Now, there are no rules at all for getting this done. The reason I do this is only because of this is sort of my way to keep consistency over and over with my work on Webflow. So it is just a matter of how I personally tackle this, and just for the sake of getting consistent with my work. But I strongly recommend you that try to find out a way that you can keep consistency on what you do. This will kind of pay off for yourself when trying to modify things on your designs or your code, and also will help a lot other people that is going to mess up with this. This one saved. Let's go for a grid. I'm going to create a grid for columns like this. So I'm going to drop a div block. Next, I'm going to call this grid AF number 1, and I'm going to select under layout, under display, I'm going to select grid. And for this, I'm going to create 2 additional columns to have 4 columns total. Inside of each column, I'm going to add a div block. I'm going to call, say, grid item number 1. All right. Now, those items in here are listings, and those are supposed to be links. People click here, and then they go towards any other place, perhaps a category or a product. But what's important here is I am creating the link block inside the grid item element, and the reason is I'm kind of trying to follow the structure that you will have if you were using a collection list. On collections lists, you're having a wrapper, a list that is kind of the equivalent of our grid, and next you're having a collection item that is kind of the equivalent of this item that I just created, grid item here. Now, if I had this created as a link, then it will become harder to use it as a collection list item because of this over here with a collection list item can't be a link. You're supposed to drop a link inside this rather than this being the link. So I just create this link inside this item to kind of follow the same structure that the collections on Webflow are having. Okay, so let me call this grid link AF number 1. I'm going to set the width for this to 100%, and I'm going to create 2 items inside of it. One that is going to correspond to the top, to the picture, and the other one will correspond to the bottom with text. So I'm going to call this grid top AF number 1. And inside of it, I'm going to set a picture. Now, for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to use pictures, assuming that all of those will be exported the same size, rather than trying to use a background picture or something like that. So I'm going to drop a picture or a image element right here. I'm going to tag this as grid pic AF number 1, for which I will set 100% width. And right after that, I'm going to work on the text that is below. Now I am having I'm having actually 2 lines perhaps. Created for mazes. Okay, let me just check this sign out. Perfect. So I am assuming that those 2 lines are actually one string of text for the sake of this exercise. Okay. This is of course something that if you're having doubts, you will usually ask your designer. But this is just a random block taken from somewhere. So what I'm going to do next here is name this element grid bottom AF number 1. And I'm going to drop here 2 additional items. One of those will be grid bottom wrapper number 1. This one I'm going to call it grid bottom wrapper number 2. And basically what those 2 elements are doing over here is kind of wrapping up what I'm having here at the bottom and here at the top. Something like this. Oh, sorry. Actually, I'm going to create a wrapper number 3 for this price tag here. So I'm going to have 3 wrappers. Okay, so I'm going to have one over here. Let me just do the later one. So in this case, I'm going to duplicate this class. And I'm going to rename it as 3 at the end. That will create a new class for me to use it individually. Now, this means say I'm going to name those 3 texts items or elements that correspond to those 3 as well as grid item text number 1, or I'm going to name it better. Actually, I'm going to write grid item headline or heading AF number 1. This will correspond to the heading. And okay, so my heading here says starting at whatever price, right? So I'm going to have this 18 pixels for the text size. I'm going to use my 1.3 EM for the height of the line, and I'm going to use next black as a color. I'll check this is not underlined and this is bold, so I'm going to use this as bold. Decorations under style, under typography, under style, and under decoration, I'm going to set this up to none. Oh, sorry, I just did this on the element that is not supposed to be done. So the reason this didn't work here is because of for setting up the style decoration as none for an element that is a link is not going to work in any other element that the link itself. So I just tried this on the text, but I have to do that on the link, and the link is over here. Okay, right here, or let me just reopen this navigator. This over here is the link. So over the link is that I am going to use typography, style, decoration, none. And here you are. It worked. Now, let me copy and paste this second string of text over here, and I will name this as check grid grid item description. Okay, and I notice this is 16 pixels, So I'm going to use the color that I have already used for other elements. I'll set this to 16 pixels for with a 1.3 em for the height of the line. And so here it is. Perfect. Looks like it is working very well. And finally, I'm going to have this line that says rack and a couple prices. Copy it into this text block, for which I'm going to have a name, sort of grid item. I'm going to set this as tag. Yes, just tag will do. IF1. Have 16 pixels for the size of this element, and for the height I'm going to have my usual 1.3 em with a black color. Now, given this point, you might have noticed that I'm naming everything on this navigator. Every single element is named, and the reason why is that very often you will require to modify properties for elements that are working all across the website. Somewhere you might have, or you might have this grid on a home page, and you might also have it on a secondary page somewhere on your website. So you would like to edit this text and make it 12 pixels, not only on this that you're currently watching, but also you want to do that change available for the other identical grid that you're having elsewhere in your website. So that is kind of the reason why I name everything here. Also, another reason here for the way that I'm naming my elements, you'll notice that I'm not using some sort of text for everything and assigning subclasses to all of those elements. The reason is I attempt to name classes with text that are describing items that are somehow grouped into a particular feature. So this is, for instance, a grid, and this is a headline for this grid. So I am not going to share classes between this headline for the grid item and this headline for the entire block, because whenever I want to change this, I want to change this alone. If I'm going to have this red color for this headline over here, I want to modify this alone and not modify this one. So this is the reason why I do this. And when you're having a very huge website, you will notice that doing so is just so great for your workflow. Okay, let's move forward. I'm going to have a margin of approximately 10 pixels between those two elements over here. Okay, here you are, 10 pixels. Okay, and also I'm going to have a very small 5 pixels margin between this element here and the text wrapper that is just after it. Here we are. What else do we have here? Okay, it seems like it is ready. Maybe I'm going to have it 2 margins, 2 pixels margin over here, and we're ready. Okay, so next step is to populate the entire grid like this. And it looks like we're almost there. Now let's check the mobile adaptation. For mobile, we're having 2 columns. Oh, by the way, I missed to set up the distance between those tiles properly. So we're having tiles with a 8 pixels gap between columns. And it looks like we're having sort of 30 pixels as the gap between rows. So here we are, perfect. Now back to mobile. Let's check how this looks like on tablets. We can reduce the margins on tablets perhaps to 40 pixels padding for the entire section. Okay, and we might want to reduce a little bit the size of this text, or otherwise to change the size of the tiles, but I'm going to stay with 4 columns for tablets. So I'm going to change the size to 16 pixels for headlines, and I'm going to use 13 pixels for the rest of the text of each tile. Also, I'm going to adjust the row distance or margin or gap to 20 pixels. And here we are. It looks like it will work. Now let's go for mobile landscape. On mobile landscape, I am definitely feeling like this is way too much using 3 columns. Maybe let's try with 3, and it definitely looks a little better. And I think it will just work. Now let's go towards mobile portrait. I will check on what the distance is between the elements and the sides of the phone device, and we're talking about 20 pixels. Okay, so I'm going to use 20 pixels like this for the left and right padding, and next I am going to set the grid to 2 columns, and I'm going to set this up to a 25 pixels gap between the columns, because of this is the way this is currently being done on the design. So what do we have here? Those elements are centered. We're having 16 pixels and 30 pixels, so 30 pixels, 16 pixels, everything is fine. So I'm just going to center the text for each tile, and it looks like we are done now. I'm gonna check on this here, 18 pixels, 20, 12. Let me check, and let's get this to be 18 pixels, 20. I'm just going to leave this in 20 pixels. This is going to become 12 pixels. Now, because if I modify those elements on mobile landscape, the changes are inherited to the device that is just below it, which is mobile portrait. So because if I set this to be 18 pixels in here, I will inherit those 18 pixels in here as well. Okay, value is inherited from this mode. Okay, and it looks like we are done. So just for the sake of getting this a little prettier before getting this finished, I am going to export and use some pictures here for this design. Okay, so let's use some pictures over here. Like this. Okay, perfect, and we are done. That's it. Very well. Final test. Let's go publish this so that we can test it on a browser. I'm currently using Safari, and looks like it is just okay. Let me check this on responsive, and it works. So perfect. That's it.